Okay, my friends, it is Tuesday, December 31st, 2024, and it just feels like the world is on fire, like the world is melting down here. And so I'm going to go through 21 different stories here very quickly, and we'll start with this. In the Moscow suburbs, unknown arsonists set fire to two electric trains. And here's another view of the same thing, the same trains on fire. So yesterday I talked about this, about how there could be an FSB connection potentially to the recent arson attacks. Now, I haven't seen more of that, but it's undeniable that these arson attacks have happened. So now the FSB connection, some viewers were saying things like, well, maybe the people that were saying it were set up, or maybe they're lying, or we don't know exactly what it is. But there is undoubtedly a string of arson attacks throughout Russia that we're not exactly sure what this is about. Okay, so this picture that you see here, in the 3 years into their 3-day military operation with over 45,000 Russian casualties per month and collapsing economy, Russians increasingly have only T tactics on which to rely. Tonight, Russians hacked a Ukrainian TV channel, attempting to sow T with fake missile warning. So here's the fake missile warning. Within a few hours, the enemy is going to attack the cities of Ukraine with Orishnik medium-range ballistic missiles. In the event of an alarm, please take shelter immediately. Do not ignore aircraft alerts. So that's what Russia is doing to the people of Ukraine, hacking into their system and putting that kind of nonsense out. Okay, so Foreign Minister of Ukraine has called for the European Union to ban imports of liquefied natural gas from Russia in order to finance the war ongoing with Ukraine. And then the EU has been preparing for this, well, except for Slovakia, who's now really upset that Ukraine is going to cut them off from oil or gas or whichever. Okay. EU prepared for cessation of Russian gas transit through Ukraine, says the European Commission representative. According to her, halting transit would have limited impact on security of EU supplies. Now, again, remember, Fico was very upset about the end of Russian gas transit, and he was calling out Zelensky about it. Now, Chechia has offered its gas pipelines and storage facilities for Slovakia's needs. The Czech Republic has proposed using its gas pipelines and storage facilities to help Slovakia. Just don't buy it from them, buy it from us. That's far better. Problem solved. Okay, Bloomberg, Poland is ready to help Ukraine if Slovakia cuts off electricity over a gas dispute. So the Polish government is preparing now to increase its domestic electricity production to offset the imbalance if Slovakia takes actions against Ukraine. Meanwhile, Bulgaria is promising to aid Moldova after Russia gas supply halt, and the energy minister in Sofia said he's ready to provide it because Russia is trying to weaponize this as a weapon of war against Moldova, trying to create unrest and instability within Moldova. Okay. Meanwhile, the U.S. is about to flood the world with liquefied natural gas. This is going to be a thing. Now, even if you don't like Trump, this whole idea, drill baby drill, is actually going to be the right policy if you want to throttle the energy resources that Russia gains from the war, from selling their oil and gas to other countries in order to sponsor the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Yermak is saying we support the idea in Ukraine of deploying European peacekeeping forces. But the main thing is to understand how many soldiers, on which line, and with what mandate. We take Macron's proposal very seriously. We're ready to work with allies to implement it, but it's got to be done the right way. It can't just be, sure, we'll do that. Russia doesn't want this at all. The last thing Russia wants is British and German and French soldiers on Ukraine's border with Russia, because that is just going to be even worse than where they were when they started. Okay, Ukrainian flag was hoisted over honorary consulate in Damascus. Okay, so in 2016, Ukraine closed its embassy in Syria as a protest against the crimes committed by Bashar al-Assad's regime. 2 years later, Syria shut down its diplomatic mission in Kyiv, and Syria, as you remember, actually recognized the 4 stolen oblasts that Russia stole from Ukraine, and one of the few countries in the world to do that. But now relations are healing there. In the Mediterranean, after what's happened with the cut cables, so a Portuguese Mecco-class frigate, NRP Alvarez Cabral, shadows a Russian large landing ship, Ivan Gren, as it heads toward Syria. This is per NATO Maritime Command. We are watching. Okay, how about that? At least they're doing something. They're no, I don't know if they're going to do anything or just escort it as it's going to Syria. Probably trying to get stuff out of Tartus still, but yeah. Okay, meanwhile, what's China been up to? China hacked the US Treasury Department, causing a major data breach, according to the New York Times. Now, this data breach was phone records and texts and things like that. As I understand, it wasn't really substantial, but still, that they hacked that far into it was ridiculously bad for China to be able to do that. Russia plans strikes on Japan and South Korea in the event of war in the Far East. Some people will probably blow this up as clickbait. I don't think you should do that. I think that while it feels like the world is melting down and lots of things are happening, this is just scenario planning as far as I can detect. As early as 2013, 2014, Russia developed plans for attacks on Japan and South Korea, including strikes on civilian infrastructure, according to details leaked from classified military documents revealed by the Financial Times. List of 160 potential targets, including military bases, installations, command centers, as well as bridges, tunnels, power plants, and even a nuclear power plant in Japan. One scenario involved the destruction of a base with 12 KH-101 cruise missiles, which were believed to have an accuracy rate of 85%, or a success rate of 85%. But in actual combat conditions, these missiles have proven far less effective. At least in Ukraine, they have. The documents also revealed how Russia tested its defenses of its neighbors. In February of 2014, Tu-95 strategic bombers conducted a 17-hour flight around South Korea and Japan, provoking 18 fighter intercepts. So they weren't doing that just for kicks and giggles. They were doing that to map this out. But again, this is scenario planning. And so most countries do this kind of thing just for military preparedness. Now, you could say that Russia has worse ambitions, and I think that's fair, but I don't think that there's anything earth-shaking in this. So you can probably safely use that as an understanding. Okay, this brave Iranian girl challenges the Islamic regime by performing gymnastics in public. She could face years of imprisonment for doing this. Look how scantily clad she is. I can see her ankles and everything. Like, that's crazy that she's doing that. But what's crazy is that she could actually go to jail for not being covered up properly and doing this kind of thing in public. Wow. Okay. South Korean court has issued an arrest warrant for impeached President Yoon Suk Yeol over martial law. Remember that happened about a month ago? The decision came after he ignored 3 summonses from the anti-corruption agency requesting his appearance and questioning over martial law. The president must be detained within 48 hours of the warrant being issued, and he just ignored it. Now, talking to a professor friend of mine who is from South Korea, who explained some of the background here. He was impeached, but whether he will be removed depends on the court, and he thinks he has the numbers in the court to escape being removed from office because just the numbers of people that are on his side as opposed to the other side on the court. Okay, Hungary will no longer have the EU presidency at midnight tonight. It will go to Poland. Hungary will be no longer in charge of that rotating council presidency, and Poland will be, and that'll be a lot better off for Ukraine. I didn't talk about this yesterday, but Jimmy Carter just passed away. He's a good guy who had terrible foreign policy, kind of not so great presidency, but after the presidency, when I say he's a good guy, he's a man of character. Okay. And after the presidency, he demonstrated by his own actions, like supporting things like Habitat for Humanity and other things. As a president, I wouldn't want him back again, but as a humanitarian, as a human being, he was great. Okay, U.S. releases $3.4 billion aid package for Ukraine as Russia intensifies attacks on energy facilities. So this direct budget support was conditional on reforms in strengthening law enforcement and anti-corruption measures. And so it's just been released by, I think, Janet Yellen and Treasury. Okay. Biden regrets, this just came out, Biden is regretting that he refused to run. Now, this is kind of silly. Like, only Biden seems to think, or Biden's inner circle seems to think, that he could have actually beaten Trump. The rest of his own party thought, no, you can't. And that's why they kind of pushed him out. Biden and some of his assistants still believe that he should have remained in the presidential race despite a poor performance in the debates and low polling results. Had he stepped aside sooner, he could have had a primary where Democrats could have emerged and you could have picked a better candidate as opposed to the hurry up offense that Kamala had faced. And so he's partly responsible for Trump's presidency, that and policies that were perhaps inflaming Trump voters. Now I'm going to read this commentary by Michael McKay. I use Michael McKay very often to show the morning updates of the, where there's 3 attacks here and 13 attacks there and 40 attacks here. He says this: Joe Biden was all about retreat, surrender, and abandonment of principle to the fascist scourge reaching out from Muscovy to sweep the world. Now, Biden thinks that he was saving the world from a nuclear war, like he was preventing World War III. So he believes he threaded the needle just enough so that he wasn't going to cause that and he would keep Ukraine going. That's the way that Biden saw things. Now, he goes on and says the fascist puppet Trump will accelerate the precipitous fall of civilized humanity, cheered on by the MAGA morons and the Vatniks. So he's striking both ways, which I think is fair. And while my predilection is to try to be as kind to each side as possible, at least he's being as balanced as possible. Now, I saw this from Andrew Perpetua, and I think this is worth understanding, that it's not just that Trump's going to do Putin's bidding, but Trump really can't do a lot to throw Ukraine under the bus at this point. Listen to this. The fact is, Trump will enter his presidency with the least leverage possible over Ukraine. Ukraine has enough money to fund all of 2025 and part of 2026. They have enough weapons and ammo to last most of 2025, and with aid from other nations, plus that money, they'll be able to fight through 2025 without issue. Now, I don't know that that's quite right. But through a good chunk of 2025, that's certainly the case. Trump will have little leverage over Ukraine, but much more leverage over Russia, particularly with sanctions. And while Ukraine does have money and weapons to fight in 2025, they could always use more, and you'd hope that Trump would actually support them rather than just withdraw. So in a worst case scenario, if Trump withdraws, they can still continue to plow on, but it would be far better for Trump to continue to arm them. People fearing Trump will be able to crush Ukraine in 2025, I think, are barking up the wrong tree. There's very little, if anything, Trump can do to force Ukraine to stop fighting. And as time goes on, the US will become increasingly less relevant to Ukraine and to Europe as a whole. In essence, the nation that's most likely to lose from Trump is the United States, if the US, for baffling reasons, were to side with Russia, or the US could maintain its standing by siding with Ukraine. Either way, Ukraine can fight on with or without US aid. And I think that's true. Ukraine can stand, and if Europe is going to continue to back it and they have their domestic production of weapons, I think they'll be okay, even if Trump completely backed out of supporting them. I saw this and I thought, wow, this is why Russia had to attack Ukraine. Russian trolls keep saying how Soviet occupation brought economic growth to Estonia. In 1938, Estonia's GDP per capita was 103% of Finnish GDP. After 50 years of Soviet occupation, it was 9%. Now, it's back to 60%, and the GDP gap is closing. This is what has happened since compared to Russia. So we're looking at comparative growth of gross salaries from 1994 to 2024, and you look at Russia and Estonia back in 1994, and if we look at where Russia is in 2024 at about 500 euros, as opposed to Estonia at 2,000. Now, this is also what was going to happen as Ukraine became more European and out of Russia's orbit, and the contrast would have been very stark. Last little bit that I want to show you. Greg Terry and my fundraiser for Ukrainian drones is over. It ended on Christmas night at midnight, and a few donations still trickled in. So as opposed to 142 or 143, it's now 146, 880. So the fundraiser's closed 481% of what our original target was. Now, we also said that there was going to be north of 120 drones. Well, the unit actually asked for a better drone. They actually asked for fiber optic drones. You can't actually jam them with electronic warfare means. So they have, instead of 120, they have 105 of the better drones. And so that's what's happened with that. Thank you to the 1,264 of you who donated. It was just remarkable to see how you poured out your love on the Ukrainian people. Thank you for those donations. Thank you for supporting Ukraine in whatever way you support Ukraine. And that's all that I have right now, but I'll be back for a New Year's special, a year in review special. That's coming up next. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.